This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo, giving you the inside track on all the big talking points from Anfield.
Hello and welcome to this week's Liverpool.com podcast. Unfortunately, another podcast reacting to another Liverpool defeat and another tricky game for the Reds as well. Before we get stuck into that and see if we can come up with some better solutions this week than we did last for how Arne Slot can get this Liverpool team playing well, don't forget to get the best discount off your NordVPN plan. You can go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. That link gives you 4 extra months on top of a 2-year plan, and there's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link with all of the information on that is in the podcast episode description box, which is below. Without further ado, though, Michael, let's get straight into it. It was another difficult game for Liverpool. We kind of got the vibe straight away as they went behind early on from a long throw. I think the first thing that came into my head, really, was when you're playing Brentford, you have to expect that a long throw is going to be coming. Liverpool knew what to do, but they couldn't seem to do anything about that. Is that the biggest worry for you at the moment, that whatever Liverpool seem to do, it doesn't seem to be working and it doesn't seem to be changing right now?
Yeah, I think that was certainly one of the most concerning aspects of Saturday's performance, that they knew what they were going to expect. They prepared for it, as Slot referenced after the match, as Van Dijk and Robertson did as well, and they simply couldn't stop it. Now, I do think that those long throws, if you get the throw right and you get the first flick on, they are very, very difficult to deal with. But at the same time, it simply, it wasn't good enough in terms of a Liverpool perspective, in terms of dealing with them. And I also think the big issue for Liverpool probably throughout, certainly the first half, was the number of throw-ins they gave away, which is a real issue. If you know that's the strength of the opposition, make sure that you stop it and make sure that you aren't giving away as many throw-ins and set pieces. So, yeah, that was one hugely concerning aspect of what was obviously a very difficult day once again for Liverpool.
Yeah, it feels individually and collectively really like Liverpool are not playing at their best. We saw them play pretty well against Frankfurt, but at the time, even I did think that Frankfurt weren't particularly impressive, and probably an away trip to Brentford in a weird way is a lot harder than a Champions League away game, which I think probably speaks to the wider situation across Europe and how big a league the Premier League is. But that's the situation that Liverpool are in, and they've got to find a way of getting better. But I mean, the way that Liverpool set up, did that surprise you at all? Because when the team sheet drops and Liverpool played basically in a very similar way to how it's not worked against Crystal Palace, Manchester United, Chelsea, there's kind of a building case there that Liverpool might need to do something slightly different. And I'm not quite sure what that something slightly different is, because that's another question entirely. But I think there's probably an argument, I think, at this point that Arne Slot is maybe trying the same thing again and again and again, and it's not working. And at some point, he might have to do something a little bit different.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I suppose a couple of caveats to that would be that, I mean, obviously they did change shape in midweek against Frankfurt, and it was better. What you would say, though, is I think it's very difficult to play that system with Mohamed Salah in the team, which, I mean, is probably a separate talking point altogether. And obviously, at the moment, they are missing what way you set up the midfield is going to have a huge impact. But I think that, I don't know necessarily about tactically whether, there's a huge amount that Slot could do to make a difference at the moment. But what I do think is, personnel-wise, I do think that I'm surprised at some of the decisions that are being made. I was absolutely amazed that Kirke started the left back. I was amazed how long it took for Slot to make substitutions on Saturday. And another thing, I mean, I think in terms of the formation, this is the squad that he's built with this formation in mind. I think you've got to kind of stick with that roughly. There are little in-game changes you can make. For me, the defence has got to just be 10 yards deeper. I think that's the second goal in particular. Just look where Damsgaard picks the ball up. Defence should not be there, should not be in that position, should be 10, 15, maybe even 20 yards deeper. There's no midfield presence around Damsgaard. They're pushing up far too much and in the centre there. I think that Jones should have just sat the base midfield and offered a bit of protection, but that is not the way Arne Slot likes to set his team up. And for me, at the moment, the way Liverpool are approaching games, they're trying to be expansive and free-flowing and making all these attacking moves. They don't actually have the foundations at the back to make that happen. And for me, at the moment, that is one of the big issues Slot has got to solve. But I don't want to be too harsh. He's obviously done a fantastic job at Liverpool, but at the moment, he's just not getting it right, is he?
No, it is tricky, as I say, to try and come up with ways of changing it. The injury list there's one or two players on there that we don't expect to be out for long. Alexander Isak and Ryan Gravenberch, we don't quite know yet on Curtis Jones. But I think there are limitations to what Liverpool can do in terms of those changes. Now, obviously, he's tried without Mohamed Salah and that's worked, but that was never likely to be a long-term fix or solution. You've got to kind of find a way of getting more out of him, obviously, and hopefully that the goal that he scored, which was excellent, is a turning point for him. But we'll see if that is the case, and we'll see, I'm sure, maybe not against Crystal Palace, but certainly against Aston Villa at the weekend, whether that's the case or not. But I think a few people have made the point now that maybe Liverpool look a little bit weak in terms of just the general physicality across the team. I know Jamie Carragher has done some good analysis on Sky for this sort of topic, really, in terms of, you go through that team. Cody Gakpo is tall, but doesn't particularly win much in the air. You've then got a couple of strikers who are similarly, technical, but not really going to hold the ball up. Mohamed Salah isn't the tallest. The midfield isn't the biggest. Florian Wirtz looks fairly lightweight, I think, at this point in his Liverpool career. Obviously, the fullbacks are not particularly tall. Is that a concern? Is that something that maybe Liverpool have overlooked? Because in the context of the Premier League title race, it's easy to make that point, isn't it? Arsenal, very physical, really good at set pieces. Liverpool, not particularly physical, really struggling in that department. There are obviously other differences as well, but it sort of feels like that's the obvious takeaway from the early part of this season. Maybe Arsenal are just set up a little bit better to go in terms of what the Premier League looks like right now.
Yeah, and football for the last 5-10 years has been going more physical, and even Pep Guardiola has embraced that. And in terms of the actual size of his team, the physicality, the speed that he often chooses to kind of qualities that his players have as well. Arsenal are the best example at the moment. Look, I think there's always going to be room for technical good footballers, and I don't think there's still no doubt in my mind that signing Florian Wirtz was a brilliant decision. But I do take the point what you say, that if you've got a Wirtz in there, do you then maybe need a little bit more physicality, perhaps? Obviously, Gravenberch brings that when he's available, but I suppose then the question is, well, if you've got Wirtz, is there a spot for Salah and McAllister then in the team who maybe lack physicality? And I just thought on Salah, actually, he looked really easily muscled off the ball, really easily knocked aside on Saturday, which this time a year ago just wasn't the case. It didn't matter who he came up against. He was getting the ball. He was knocking players left, right, and centre. We saw a tiny little bit of that. Do you remember the goal against Atletico earlier this season? That was just a little example of him the way he was last season. But the amount of times on Saturday the ball went into him and his touch is off, the defender was all over him and just managed to easily win the ball. So that is another huge problem for Liverpool, and it's been a conversation around Man City about how reliant they are on Erling Haaland. Liverpool have been reliant on Mohamed Salah pretty much for the entirety of Arne Slot's managerial reign. So, and he's not producing the goods, and Liverpool are suffering for that. And the list of problems at the moment are endless for Liverpool. And sadly, the solutions to those issues aren't quite as easy to find.
Yeah, this physicality and the kind of comparison to Arsenal, I think, is particularly interesting when you think of how many times Arne Slot spoken about wanting to be a bit more like PSG. Now, PSG in the Champions League, excellent in their own league, obviously isn't as physical as the Premier League is able to kind of play in that way. They've got three very technically gifted midfielders who basically just keep the ball off you, and they don't have to compete in aerial duels because the ball doesn't leave the ground. You've then got forwards who are able to press, and obviously there's an element of physicality to that, but it's not the case of pumping a ball up to a centre forward and kind of building from there. It's a very different kind of physicality in terms of speed and explosiveness. It feels to me a little bit like Liverpool have gone down that route with some of the players that they've bought. At times, I think it could work really well, and I think there will be games where they do score 5 goals and look free-flowing, but it's just trying to get that balance right in the other games, isn't it? Because there's no point Liverpool going and beating Eintracht Frankfurt 5-1, but then the next game, they get undone by a long throw-in. Do you think they've got the right tools to be able to fix some of these issues? I know that's not an easy question to answer because there's multiple things that need to be fixed, but does Arne Slot have the right tools at his disposal to be able to find a better way? Or are you a little bit worried that maybe the pattern in the early part of this season might just be how it is for Liverpool this year?
I mean, I think there's probably a question about this season. I mean, it feels like more and more this season, the title race is probably going to be beyond Liverpool. I think in terms of the team that Liverpool have built, and look, they brought in a lot of players over the summer. You and I discussed what great signings they were. It would be false of me to now turn around and say that I don't think that he has assembled a good squad. I think the PSG analogy is a good point, Matt. And it feels like at the moment that everyone has to play like Arsenal or Brentford. I do think this is a little bit of a phase. I think football will slightly move on. This is inevitably the way. And I wouldn't look at that Liverpool team and think, well, that squad that's been put together is incapable of competing with football the way it is now in modern day. I don't agree with that. I think there's an argument to perhaps say that you look at that team and say, could it do with a bit more height? And I think that is perhaps a point, in that maybe if you've got a Wirtz, as I say, you need to think about just adding a little bit more physicality then as a result of that. I think that's perhaps a point. But by and large, I do think that in the long term, this squad is totally built to win trophies, and there's a really good foundation of good players who, in terms of the physicality compared to PSG, for instance, I don't think they're lacking, but I do think they're lacking in comparison to Arsenal, which is more of a height and strength and that sort of physicality. So in short, I think that in the long term, I think the squad is equipped. Right now, it's obviously not working there.
For this season, I am starting to wonder whether Liverpool might be better set up in terms of the Champions League and going a long way in that. I just wonder whether the squad's make-up and even purely just the time. Obviously, you can relatively easily, I know Liverpool haven't been perfect in the Champions League so far this season, but you'd imagine that they will get through even if they need a playoff to get into the knockout proper. By the time the quarters, the semis, the final come around, you'd like to think that Liverpool are a little bit more cohesive. As you say, I mean, by the time Liverpool kick off against Aston Villa next weekend, I'm pretty sure they'll be 10 points behind Arsenal because Arsenal go to Burnley. You'd imagine that they're going to be able to beat them. At that point, the pressure really is on for Liverpool to start playing well in the league. But the Champions League, PSG being the classic example last season, did not start very well at all. But then by the end of the competition, they kind of knew what they were doing. They had a huge amount of cohesion within that team. All those quality players came together at the right time. It's early to be writing off Liverpool's title chances completely, but it does kind of feel, to me at least, like the Champions League might have to become something that Liverpool think about a little bit more as the season goes on. And you can never hang your hat on winning that competition. A lot of it comes down to luck or the draw or being in form at the right time or one or two moments in certain ties. But it almost feels to me a little bit like if Arsenal don't win the Premier League title from this position, that would be a surprise, I think, in terms of not wanting to put the pressure on them, but just the situation they're in now. It's hard to argue with that. The Champions League maybe is something that the Liverpool might have to turn their head a little bit more towards.
And I think the way the team now are at the moment, they almost seem more set up for winning a cup competition, just in terms of the basketball feel it can sometimes come from a cup game. They lack control in games at the moment, and I think that to win a league title, you need to be controlling the vast majority of matches. I think in cup competitions, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. And what I do think is interesting is, I was thinking about the Palace game in midweek, and my initial thought was, well, Liverpool it might be in their best interest to drop out or to be eliminated. And then you suddenly start thinking about it. Well, Champions League is very difficult to win. The Premier League is looking increasingly like a very big ask for Liverpool. And that suddenly only leaves you with two trophies that Liverpool potentially, could win this season. I do actually think they have a chance in the Champions League, but yeah, the point I'm making. So I do think that increasingly you just look at the title race, and the question now isn't to me, can Liverpool win the title? It's, are they actually going to be in the title race? And that's a big thing to say. For a few weeks ago, we all thought, the squad that was built, they were going to push on and win it. But you just now look at these last four games, there's so many deficiencies and so many issues that are so clear already. It would take a miraculous kind of comeback for Slot to find the answer to all these problems and get this team playing cohesively and working together in time to challenge an Arsenal side who have conceded 3 goals in 9 games and just look so effective in dealing with what the Premier League is at the moment. So yeah, I think it's increasingly difficult. I don't know what your thoughts are. Do you think they can mount the title challenge?
I mean, it's not impossible, is it? But they are going to have to turn things around pretty quickly. If the gap is what it is now at Christmas, then Arsenal are in a position basically where Liverpool were last season, where they get themselves ahead and then can kind of cruise a little bit. And if you have one or two wobbles, then you're so far ahead, it doesn't particularly matter. And I think we've seen both times when Liverpool have won the Premier League in the last few years that not only do they get ahead, but there's almost 2 or 3 pivotal weekends across the course of the season. And it felt a little bit like that to me this weekend, which, again, at this point, it does feel a little bit dramatic to say it. But, you look at Liverpool losing, Manchester City lost. I mean, Bournemouth are in second at the moment, but I don't think anybody's going to put them into the kind of title race picture. I just don't think they have the squad to last the distance in that. But, you look at Arsenal, they've won again. They looked, reasonably in control. I know Crystal Palace maybe are not the same Palace team that were on that big run when they beat Liverpool, but it just felt like a bit of a momentum swing, I think, for them. Clearly, Liverpool have got problems and flaws, and it's probably not exactly correlated with the winning run that they had and then the losing run that they've had. It's probably they were slightly better than where they should have been to start with, and then slightly worse during this losing run. But, for Liverpool and for City, I think City have got maybe 1 or 2 things to sort out as well. The reliance on Haaland to score being the obvious thing. For Arsenal, it just feels like they've got fewer issues there. I mean, at the moment, you could argue they've not got any issues. They've got 1 or 2 injuries and maybe an over-reliance in 1 or 2 positions, but it just feels like they're better set up, as you say, to just be more in control, more calm, just kind of win quietly and efficiently and kind of get on with things. I suppose the only thing you can say with Arsenal is that maybe if the set-piece goals do dry up, maybe that will see them drop a couple of points and things can change. But even if that happens, Liverpool at the moment, I think it's hard to make the argument that Liverpool could put together 5 wins on the spin, which, if Liverpool can't do that, then it almost doesn't matter what Arsenal do.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think when we look back at the end of the season, actually these 4 weeks where I think Liverpool were 5 points clear, and now suddenly it's been a turnover that Arsenal are 7 points clear. They could be the pivotal weeks that you look back and say, it wouldn't surprise me if in May we look back and say that Arsenal established this lead over Liverpool and Liverpool just couldn't overturn it. I just think now, and I know it is a bit dramatic to say after essentially 4 bad performances. Well, no, but it's not even on that because it's based on the performances before the defeats. But I just very quickly come to the belief that I just look at this Liverpool team and just don't know if they can challenge for the title. I just think there's too many issues for Slot to solve.
In terms of the season then, if they're not going to win the league title, does it become very quickly a need to make sure that they don't get drawn into a top 4 race? Because we've seen, in the past, they have kind of spiraled and gone on runs where you almost think that they're feeling a little bit sorry for themselves at times. Things aren't going their way, and it kind of just gets ingrained into you. You'd like to think that that's not going to be the case when Liverpool have got so much quality and so many players, but they're not that many results away from something like that being in the back of people's minds, I don't think.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the quality throughout the league now is just so high that every single week it's just a difficult game for Liverpool. I mean, you look at the fixture list coming up, the next 4, for instance, before the international break, it's Palace, FA Cup holders, who have given Liverpool some really difficult games. Villa in Europe beat City at the weekend, then Real Madrid, and then Man City. It is just relentless. Okay, look, they're not all in the Premier League, obviously, but I think Liverpool just need to get through this period, try and pick up as many points as they can, and then actually the run of fixtures after the November international breaks are relatively kind of over the Christmas period, and that's where they need to get to. And at the moment, they need to just find a way of picking up results, even if they're not winning football matches, which obviously a couple of weeks ago we were praising them for doing. And right now, at the moment, they're just not doing that. And, to bring it back to the Brentford game, or just look at the way Slot set up. And I am very critical, to be honest, of the way that the Slot approached that game, because I think he should have approached it looking to make Liverpool difficult to beat. And then you build from that. And then you play your football. And then you get Salah on the ball and Verts. And then you make things happen. But at the moment, it's just not there. And there's too much risk and not enough concern about what's going back towards their own goal, Liverpool. And it's a huge problem.
Yeah, I mean, the only sort of positives that you can look at the moment is that I think all of the individual problems that they have are solvable, even though there's a number of them. I think there is a way of being better from set pieces and sort of setting yourself up as a collective in a better way than what they have. The two fullbacks being isolated on those things. I think Milos Kerkez was caught out, wasn't he, for one of the goals? Maybe the first one where he just kind of gets brushed out the way. Maybe there's a way that you can, put Van Dijk a little bit closer to him, or, have somebody else marking these players that are going to be targeted and things like that. I also think with the Liverpool attackers, Alexander Isak at some point is surely going to look a little bit better than what he has done up to now. Mohamed Salah, again, surely at some point is going to start to find some form. Florian Wirtz, as we've both said already, I think we know how good he can be. There's enough there that Liverpool can start to score goals and look a little bit better. But yeah, it's a hard time to make that argument, I think, in the run that they've been on and how poor they've looked in some of these games. I mean, Arne Slot admitted, didn't he, that this latest defeat was the worst one of the lot. It's almost the opposite of what you want to hear, really. When the results are going that way, the performances are not getting better, they're getting worse. There are still things that you can cling to, I think, though. If you're a Liverpool fan watching this team, there's enough individuals in there to think that they are still going to win games. They are still going to be there or thereabouts in terms of, maybe not the Premier League title, but some of the other trophies. How do you see the next, let's say, period between now and Christmas coming? How do you see Liverpool not just changing things around, but maybe finding a way of getting more out of one of these, attacking players that they've spent so much money on, or Salah? The whole system last season was built around Salah, but it doesn't seem to be the case this time. What do you sort of see as being the priority in the next couple of months?
Well, I mean, to take you back to your first point, there's definitely enough quality in this team. And I know that there's been a lot of quick, changes of mind around Liverpool and a redrawing and reflecting on the summer business. And there's no doubt in my mind the quality and the ability is there in this team. I think that one of the big things that Slot has got wrong over the last few weeks is not picking players who are playing well. Particularly, I'm just staggered that he keeps playing Kerkez. I just can't fathom it why Andy Robertson isn't playing. And look, I was critical of Robertson last season. I think we all were. I think that he needs at the moment to find a system and find a way of playing that is maximising the best out of the players who are playing well. So that's, for instance, Hugo Ekitike, who barely had a sniff at the weekend, Dominic Szoboszlai, who has probably been Liverpool's best player this season. I think Wirtz has had moments in games recently, particularly obviously in Germany last week. And I think that's got to be the aim now, is trying to somehow find a system and a way of playing that is getting the best out of the players who are playing well. Now, it's easier said than done. And yeah, and the other thing, I suppose, in all of this for Slot is, at what point does this season, is there an acceptance that this season is perhaps a bit of a transitional season, and that this is putting together a squad that is going to challenge for leagues and titles and trophies for the next 3-4 years? And I think we are, the further and further they fall away from Arsenal, I do feel like we are getting closer and closer to that, which is, I suppose, a separate answer to your question. But yeah, and I just think that he needs to find a way, as I say, of playing to make Liverpool difficult to beat, and then think about being expansive. And it's been the other way around this season. It's there's just been so many issues for Slot to deal with.
Just to finish then, let's talk a little bit about Crystal Palace, obviously in the League Cup, different competition, probably a chance for a few different players to get a go. I've seen a few people suggest that maybe Arne Slot should just go strong and try and get some form back into these players, but I don't think that's probably going to happen. I think he will make changes and bring a few players in. Federico Chiesa, probably the obvious one that people have been crying out for, probably an opportunity for him. One or two others as well who could come into this team. Is there anyone that you expect to see on Wednesday that you think might be able to do enough to convince Arne Slot that they might have a bit of a role moving forwards? I mean, Chiesa is one that people have called for, but I'm not sure that I can really see that in terms of 90 minutes. I see him more as a 10 or 15 minutes here and there off the bench kind of player. But either him or anybody else, is there anyone that you think this Wednesday is going to be important for?
This is the thing with Slot as well. He really makes his mind up on players, and it's very difficult to change that perspective, isn't it? Case is an example that no matter how well he's played this season, he just doesn't seem to want to give him a chance, certainly in one of the bigger games from the off. I know he played 45 minutes in Germany, but still, and I was thinking Wataru Endo, for instance, at the weekend, Liverpool really could just do with a defensive midfielder to just sit in front of the back four. But I just can't see, even Wataru Endo could have an amazing game against Crystal Palace. I just can't see any scenario in which he is incorporated into the team for any upcoming kind of Premier League, Champions League matches. I suppose Joe Gomez is maybe the other one you would look at and think, but again, I just can't see a scenario. I mean, he hasn't started a Champions League or Premier League game this year. Slot has just stuck with the same centre-backs that obviously led Liverpool to the title last season. I mean, it's not a great answer, to be honest, but the answer is no, really. I just can't see any of those players. I think he should make changes. I think that he could do with giving the players a bit of a rest as well. And, looking ahead to Villa, which should be a difficult game. But no, I can't. Can you see anyone coming in?
Andy Robertson is probably the only one. But then I suppose you would argue that even if he played well, it wouldn't be him playing well against Palace that convinced Arne Slot. It would probably be Kerkez not playing well in other matches. So it's almost not really an example of that. But yeah, apart from that, I suppose it's going to be an important game for McAllister. If McAllister can play just to get some minutes back in his legs, I think Liverpool are missing it. As much as he's not the most physical and tall player by any stretch, I think he is someone that they have missed and obviously hasn't been at his best for a number of months now, including the summer and the injury and all of that kind of thing. Yeah. I wonder if we'll see him just to see him get a little bit more up to speed. But yeah, apart from that, I mean, Chiesa, as I say, I can't really see that. And I mean, Engamoa probably will start, but he isn't, just purely because of his age and lack of experience. He's not going to be in the team every single week, 3 times a week. It's just not going to happen. So yeah, it kind of ties back to where we started, really, doesn't it? In terms of, Liverpool have got to make changes, but quite what those changes are, I'm not too sure.
Yeah, I think he'll go for quite a few changes. I mean, he does obviously have a lot of injuries, which is a bit of a problem at this stage. You do wonder what the defence in particular is going to look like at centre back and right back. Yeah, I suppose on Robertson, I mean, I kind of almost think of him as a player who is kind of in and around the team at the moment, but I suppose at the same time, he hasn't started a single Premier League match this season. So yeah, you're probably right in that one. Yeah, I think it should be a completely changed team. I think there's pros and cons of Liverpool win or lose on Wednesday night. I think there's an argument to say that in terms of the squad, keeping fresh, if they go out, it's not a bad thing. But then obviously, given the way the season's going, it could be one of the few opportunities to potentially win a trophy. I suppose that's the same every season, but particularly this year when the league is starting to feel more and more difficult. But yeah, I'm interested to see anyway. And the Southampton game in the last round, we wrote a lot about that, about players who could come in and potentially play. And don't know, maybe it's slightly changed the opinion around Chiesa in particular, but other than that, it didn't have a huge impact. But I'd certainly be interested to see if that is the case on Wednesday night, whether anyone can stake a claim to be part of the team in kind of the Premier League and the Champions League matches.
Yeah, as we've said, there's not too many options for that to be the case, but it will be interesting, I think, just to see, what Arne Slot does, even how he lines his team up, because he's not got loads of centre-backs to change. You might have to bring a midfielder back in, and that might then change and have a knock-on effect. And of course, at the moment, as we record this, we're not quite sure where the likes of Gravenberch and Curtis Jones and one or two others are in terms of those injuries. So, yeah, I'm sure it will be an interesting game and hopefully one where Liverpool can get back on track. I know, obviously, Crystal Palace have beaten Liverpool in the not too distant past, but I think at Anfield, obviously, they will be interesting in terms of their team selection as well, because they're in Europe and it's almost a game that neither team could do in some ways. But it'll be interesting, I think, and hopefully Liverpool can start to get themselves back on track. But I think we'll leave it there for this week. Thank you to Michael for joining me, for you guys at home as well for watching and for listening. In the YouTube comments, do feel free to let us know what changes you'd like to see in the Liverpool team. We will check those out across the next couple of days. And as I say, we'll be back next week with the next Liverpool.com podcast right here on the Blood Red Channel.
This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo, giving you the inside track on all the big talking points from Anfield.